The Spartan Mag VCast is brought to you by JFQ Lending. That is the title sponsor for the VCast. We're really excited about JFQ Lending and the things they've contributed to our web community at SpartanMag.com. Josh Yoder is the executive loan officer at JFQ Lending who's serving you. Go check out his post over at, or my post at the Underground Bunker message board. You can contact Josh Yoder through that pinned post. JFQ Lending is a residential mortgage company licensed in nearly 40 states across the United States of America. JFQ Lending has nearly 3,000 five-star online reviews, including nearly 1,800 with the Better Business Bureau. 1,800 five-star reviews with the Better Business Bureau. JFQ Lending carries an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. JFQ Lending is offering 30-year fixed rates right now below 3% and 15-year rates in the low 2s, maybe even to the high 1%. JFQ Lending. And as an exclusive offer to Spartan Maggers, JFQ Lending will cover any appraisal costs. So check out JFQ Lending. Josh Yoder, he's our friend. He's your friend. And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. My name is Jim Comparoni, publisher of SpartanMag.com, here with Paul Konyndyk, associate editor of SpartanMag.com. I'm going to talk about the Spartans have real sports to talk about. No games being played, but more and more semblance of reality in terms of preseason football practice, competitions, hearing a little bit about player development, progress, all those things that we usually talk about in August, talking about them here in October. Better late than never. Feel good about it. I know Konyndyk probably does too. Paul, how you doing, man? Doing all right?
I'm doing good. I said last week that this kind of feels like football for the first time, and now that we're starting to talk to some assistant coaches and get some player takes and that type of thing, it really does feel like football. There's a lot of unknowns, but it actually feels like we're actually talking about, scenarios and in relation to specific players. And it does feel like we're ramping up towards something. So it feels good to be really working again instead of, talking about the same old thing over and over again.
There are unknowns, and unknowns that a lot of Michigan State fans are talking about, maybe getting excited about. Chief among them, of course, is the quarterback situation. Mel Tucker spoke on a Zoom press conference this week. So did running backs coach Will Peagler, defensive cornerbacks coach Harlan Barnett, and some player interviews as well. We'll start with what Tucker had to say. Mel Tucker didn't talk much at all about player development. It was mostly the macro things again, which is the way he wants to do it right now. Some of the assistant coaches talked more about individuals, but he was asked about the quarterback situation and said that all three quarterbacks are getting reps. That's congruent with what I'm hearing also. Not that he would lie about anything like that, but getting to the point where, what are we, 2 weeks from game time or 3 weeks as of now? It's the 19th, 3 weeks, right?
Two weeks and some change.
Right, 15 days. Okay, so 2 weeks out. Normally with 2 weeks out, you wouldn't necessarily still be repping three quarterbacks. They've had one scrimmage. A lot of times the first scrimmage would be a way to get down to maybe two quarterbacks, get down to a two deep, so you can soak a two deep with reps in preparation for an opponent, because they've got one more week of preparation, and then it gets into Rutgers week for the last 6 days at least. So they still have three quarterbacks, Paul, and I can tell you that I've been hearing through some sources and some back channels that Theo Day has impressed them with some of the physical attributes, the arm, the frame, some of the foot quickness, zip release. They like what they see physically. Psychologically, mentally, foggy. I mean, remember, I don't want to make too big of a deal about one particular snap, but you remember the Wisconsin game. I think it was the Wisconsin game. He went in for mop-up duty and made an error on a reverse pivot on a handoff. And remember, Mark D'Antonio yanked him right off the field again, right? Now that I'm hearing these things about some fog issues and stuff, that one error out there in the one game, you would think, I know D'Antonio was a stickler, but one error on a reverse pivot, knowing D'Antonio, might not be something that he would yank someone off the field for, unless it was just the latest of a series of things like that. I'm reading into it a little bit, but we haven't had football to watch in 10 months, so I'm kind of parsing into this. Theo Day has talent, but they have to make sure that light is on, if that makes sense. And the light was not on when he was yanked off the field in that particular game. So he's still getting reps. So it means something to me that three quarterbacks are getting reps. We all know Rocky Lombardi is firmly in that competition. We're all assuming Peyton Thorne is in there also. I've spoken in the past that I've heard that Brad Salem was leaning toward thinking that Peyton Thorne was the future for 2020 more so than Rocky Lombardi. Peyton Thorne has impressed people behind the scenes. We've not seen him in a green and white uniform. We've not seen him in a spring game, but he has some ability, and he's an interesting one. So we know a lot of what Rocky Lombardi is. We hear that he is improved. I've heard that he is improved. I've heard that from parents of players through their players. So he's improved, but he needs to improve a lot to be good enough to be a winning quarterback. Hearing good things physically about Theo Day and Peyton Thorne, Brad Salem liked him. It's an interesting race. We don't know all the specifics, but all of that agrees with what he revealed, that they are still repping 3 quarterbacks at this late stage. That's what I've heard about it, Paul. Do you have any takes on what Tucker said about the quarterback situation? It wasn't much, and now they're hoping to have a scrimmage this weekend as we record this. That'll be a pivotal one. We won't get any stats or much information about that, but next week I'm assuming they're going to have to be down to 2 quarterbacks next week. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to be down to 2 quarterbacks, and I think they probably will have their guy picked, or they should have their guy picked. I don't think we'll know who the guy is, and we've seen this a couple times with the teams that Michigan State has played early in the season. I think back to that Boise State game Michigan State played. They were talking all offseason, who's going to be the quarterback, who's going to be the quarterback. A lot of misinformation being put out there. Same thing when Oregon and Michigan State played, and they were changing quarterbacks. Same thing with Arizona State a little bit early on with that true freshman. You don't really quite know who that quarterback is, and that's intentional because they want you to practice for different guys. I think for this thing that's going to come down to, Mel Tucker said something to the effect of these guys are all are interesting because they do different things. They give us something different. So when I'm thinking of what he's saying out there, I'm thinking, okay, what does he value in a quarterback? And there might be guys that are physically impressive. In some ways, there might be guys that have more experience. But I think when it comes down to it, from a defensive coach, a guy that's had a defensive background in the NFL, and what it kind of has an idea for which quarterbacks give him the most problems or the ones that he doesn't want to see. I think when it comes down to like guys that come from the NFL, they're looking at people that are quick decision makers, and they want to see quick decisions and probably accurate throws. So I think there's going to be guys out there that probably impress you physically. I think even in that Wisconsin game, going back to that, we asked Antonio questions after that game about, hey, Theo Day did some good things, and then he shut us down. Like the first thing he said, because I think Theo Day picked up a first down maybe with his legs in that game. I can't remember. He did a couple good things or made a good throw, and the first thing D'Antonio said is he didn't run the play right, and it's a basic play out of the huddle. So if I'm thinking from what a defensive coach wants for his program, what has the best long-term success, it's going to be the guy that makes the quick decisions and does it and makes accurate throws. If they've got a guy that does those 2 things, be it a veteran or be it a young guy, that's the guy, in my opinion, who's going to get the job. Unless there's some other serious flaws that would prevent him from doing that, like serious mechanical flaws or that type of thing. So that's, to me, that still thinks, when I hear that, when I think about that, guys that make quick decisions, I think of guys like Kirk Cousins, or he was in good competition with a lot of good players, but quick decisions, accuracy. I'm thinking, to me, I would say that maybe Peyton Thorne fits that. The one thing that Theo Day does give you is he's a big athlete, and maybe if you're going to go with some of the read option stuff, maybe he's going to be able to give you some explosive plays. At the same time, you've got to make quick decisions if you're doing read option stuff. So, I kind of think it's going to be between Lombardi and Thorne, and if it's close, I would say Thorne, because he's got the biggest long-term potential. I mean, you would it goes back to like when they were looking at Brian Lewerke before he hurt himself in that Michigan game. He showed them the stuff that they wanted in the program and the most tools that they were looking for, and they're willing to develop that, as opposed to going with an older quarterback. Now things kind of fell apart after he hurt himself in that Michigan game, but they couldn't use him anymore. But I think they're going to go with the guy that's the most accurate and the guy that has a quick brain, and that's kind of what I would do. But you don't know. The other thing that Mel Tucker said, that I thought was interesting is he made it sound like everyone was getting reps in relation to each other, but he also said something in terms of overall depth chart. He called it a rep chart, but he also said that every guy knows where he stands in relation to the other guy, in terms of coaches, assistant coaches, like position coaches being very clear with the communication. So, I don't know if that's just lip service or what, but it's been kind of quiet about, intentionally quiet, I think, obviously, about this quarterback, situation. Piegler mentioned that the first scrimmage was very vanilla. This is the scrimmage, the second scrimmage, where I think you'll see some. I think you'll see some of the blitzes and that type of stuff that probably will be more likely to be indicative of what a guy might see in a game week against a different opponent and how his brain could process that type of stuff. So I think they'll have a good idea of where they want to go with a quarterback coming out of this second scrimmage. I don't think we'll know until game week.
Mm-hmm. And also, one other thing to consider is, Mel Tucker was talking about the importance of cross-training players to get ready in case there's a COVID outbreak, to have more than one player available at other positions. That could feed into the repping three quarterbacks at this late stage as well. I mean, you have to have a quarterback. You don't want to get into a COVID situation at that position. You don't want to get into a situation like that at any position, but you don't want to be depleted at that position, of course. Wondering if I was going to play a big if, like if Rocky Lombardi does not win the starting job, how long do they stick with him? Would they want him to play the rest of his career as a backup? I mean, this is a 6'4" physical competitive athlete. I've heard again through back channels that there have been discussions about position changes with players, and he would be a candidate for that if he does not win this job. And that's something that he might not be thinking about, but it's something that in the war room, in the football building, back in the hallways, in the meeting rooms, that's something they're probably discussing if he does not win the job. If there's a competition right now, there's a chance he might not win it. If he doesn't win it, do you keep him there for a long time? Tight end is not not the deepest position for Michigan State in terms of talent. Just something to think about for the long term. Nothing against Rocky. I'm not saying that I don't believe in him as a possibility at quarterback. I'll remain open-minded on that. When you talked about decision making, I think that's something when we look back on Connor Cook, if you watch some of the old replays that have been on TV throughout the last few weeks and months, when I watch Connor Cook again, the thing that strikes me is how quick he made decisions. And that's something we talked about while he was the quarterback here. And early in his career, he had accuracy problems, but he was able to fine-tune those a little bit. Kirk Cousins was a guy early in his career that would try to throw the ball through a wall sometimes and had some ill-timed interceptions. Usually when things got when the water got a little deep, when all of a sudden Michigan State was suddenly down 10 with 10 minutes to go, that's when he would try to make a play. And that's not a bad time to take a risk. And Connor Cousins consistently improved to the point where he's an NFL quarterback now. Connor Cook, I'm not sure that shoulder ever recovered from that injury that he sustained at Maryland. He revealed a year after that he was playing with a bad shoulder, of course, against Iowa and against Alabama. Was the shoulder still messed up when he was trying to make NFL teams? I don't know. We don't know. Connor Cook might not be forthcoming on that, but that's all. That all ends the chapter on Connor Cook. But his decision making, the way he would look around and make reads, sometimes he would make a bad decision and someone would drop an interception, like against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. But you're right about decisions and those reads. And I agree. Peyton Thorne, with his runaround ability and swashbuckling ability, things we've heard, things that Brad Salem liked about him, he would be more in that category. But someone needs to come to the forefront in that scrimmage. We won't find out who it is, but certainly some important football on the practice field in private at Spartan Stadium will be happening this weekend, and we won't begin to know the outcome of that until right around kickoff of the Rutgers game, I would think. In terms of other news this week, before we get back into football, I want to talk basketball a little bit. Tom Izzo announced 3 new captains for the 2021 season: Joshua Lankford, Aaron Henry, Foster Loyer. Foster Loyer, somewhat of a surprise. Aaron Henry, you have to think this should be part of his contributions as a junior at this point. Joshua Lankford back for a 5th year. The reports on Joshua Lankford continue to be optimistic. So Joshua Lankford becoming a 3-time captain, I think only the 6th Michigan State player to ever to hold that honor. Your thoughts on those captains? A little surprise in there, and also maybe a good sign for Joshua Lankford's continued progress. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Lankford's a natural just because he's been through everything. Some of the best captains in any sport are people that can commiserate with their teammates, but have been through a lot of different things. And he's been through the highs, he's been through the lows, and he showed the perseverance. And he was there for his teammates last year. I mean, he's one of the older guys, and I think he's a good fit. Aaron Henry, I've always felt like he had captain material. Like I know some people want to question what kind of makeup he has based on based on, okay, some of the, decisions he made with the NBA, or, whether, he was assertive enough when he's playing basketball. But if you talk to this kid, man, from the first day he stepped on campus, I felt like he had a chance to be a captain in this program. And Foster Loyer, he's been a good soldier, and he's a guy that cares about his teammates. And he also knows what he's doing. You don't have to be a big time contributor to be an effective captain. You have to be able to communicate with your teammates, and you have to have the respect to your teammates. And these guys, to me, are the guys that have been, they've been around a long time. They each have a reason why their teammates respect them. Aaron Henrich is probably one of the most physically gifted guys on the team, and he cares. And he's a smart kid. Foster Loyer, high basketball IQ. It's not his fault that he's not athletic enough to defend other point guards. And Josh Lankford, one of the best kids that we've seen come through that Michigan State program. So I think these aren't like captains are all different. There's no guy on there that I can see right now that's going to be like an in-your-face, leader, like a Mateen Cleaves type. That's really going to take you over the top, or a Draymond Green type that's just going to kind of will you to do something. Aaron Henry, I think, has the capacity to maybe be a little bit vocal, but I think it's a good group of captains.
Big leadership shoes to fill with Winston and Tillman having moved on. Like you said, Tillman was a guy that improved in that area, was so important in terms of communication in the back line of defense. You're right, Aaron Henry has some of the personality attributes that should lend themselves to being a good, effective captain. First, like Judd Heathcote used to say, he has to get his complete game squared away and straightened out, meaning consistency, not having so many ups and downs. And with that, I think he could really elevate himself as a captain. And we're getting toward that time. I mean, we've not started football season yet, so it seems like it's not really fall, but you look outside the window and you see the leaves change and the cool air, you know that it is fall. It's October 9th. Last year, Michigan State's media day for basketball was October 15th. Would have been 6 days from now. Midnight Madness, October 25th. 16 days from now. 15 days from now. So it is basketball season. It doesn't seem like it because we've not played a football game. So that calendar is messed up, but they are marching toward getting ready for a season, which will start a little bit later than normal, but it's getting close to being go time for them. I think with Loyer being captain, I think it's an Izzo nod to a guy that's becoming an upperclassman, who's a team first guy, who also is basically going to lose his position, his ability to become a starter with Winston gone, because Rocket Watts will be the lead point guard. So it's a nod to him, someone who's accepted and can see what his role is going to be, I would think. Reminds me a little bit at midseason, once upon a time, when Izzo made Isaiah Dahlman a captain. But this time with Loyer, he's doing it up front. They value Loyer as a guy that can play 10 minutes a game. Maybe he can do more. I don't know. But someone who's accepting that and also working to help others. So behind the scenes, Loyer is working to help Aaron Henry become a better player. He's working to help Rocket Watts. I'm assuming that all feeds into it. He was voted captain along with Lankford and Henry, according to Izzo, and Izzo went ahead and rubber stamped it for him to be a third captain. As far as personality types, I think Rocket Watts eventually is going to show some of those leadership skills and leadership ability. You know, he's got a little bit of that killer in him. He's got that tenacity. And as he improves as a player, he might not wear the captain stripes, but on the court, late in games, when things are getting tight, I would think that Rocket Watts would join Aaron Henry in being an on-court leader. But certainly a good nod to Loyer to have that, and that's going to look good on a resume someday too, right, Paul?
And one thing I wanted to go back with on the whole captaincy last year, I think Michigan State, you look at the leadership of that team last year, and we all talk about, Tillman being a great leader. That was a process for him. He's not a guy that ever was like, willing to, he was not like personality wise a guy that's willing to step out and play the role of bad cop. Cassius Winston, also kind of a nice guy. He's not a yeller screamer. And then what he went through personally kind of really made it difficult for him to play the role of captain. So those guys are great guys, and they ended up being good captains. They won a Big Ten championship, and they overcame all kinds of adversity. But last year's, captain situation wasn't what we've come to expect necessarily from a Michigan State when you think of the guys like Cleaves, Draymond Green, and those type of captains. So it's a little bit different last year. I think Tillman, if he had come back, he would have been a heck of a captain, because I think he was kind of growing into that role where first, like you talk about, like where Aaron Henry is, you got to take care of your business, then you can take care of other people's business. But I do think, with everything that guy like Josh Lankford has been through, he's going to be a guy that people respect his voice, and he's always been a guy where people respect his voice and his perspective, because he's always put others ahead of himself. He's always been kind of a guy that's been selfless. I don't know how many times I'd have a hard time walking into practice if I was injured the way he was, and sit through all those practices that I couldn't participate in. So he's got the respect of his teammates. Aaron Henry's a hard worker, puts in a lot of time, and he's grown, and he's overcome a lot of adversity too. So I think he's got that potential as well. Rocket Watts down the road, but I'm happy for Foster Loyer. Anybody that can accept a backup role, that's impressive.
All right, now getting back to football a little bit. Harlan Barnett spoke on a Zoom press conference. Always good to hear from Harlan Barnett. The Michigan State defensive backfield was not a strength last year. Took a solid few steps back last year in the second year under Paul Haynes as the defensive backs coach. We talked about it as that season progressed, and the fact that there were miscommunications on a regular basis toward the second half of that season. In terms of player development, questionable as to how well some of the defensive backs were coming along after Harlan Barnett left. Now Harlan Barnett is back. He's had a good several weeks to coach these guys, beginning the first week of August, then the delay for 5 weeks. Then he gets them back with improved physicality after 5-6 weeks of winter conditioning. And Harlan Barnett seems optimistic about this group. Now, he's always going to be somewhat optimistic, but I'll run a quote here, a soundbite of him talking about Shakur Brown, a guy that started last year, had some ups and downs, but Harlan Barnett talking about Shaq Brown, he believes ready to take that next step.
Definitely see Shaq taking the next step, and he's a really good football player. As you all know, that I constantly talk about guys being complete corners, not cover corners, so they can run, cover, and tackle. That's what we're looking for. And Dominique Long is a guy that's vying for a spot. Kalyn Girvin, Chris Jackson, Julian Barnett, Davion Williams. And I think I pretty much covered everybody, but they're all really doing a good job trying to apply the techniques and coachings that we're giving them and getting better every day. So it's a good group, and I'm fortunate to work with these guys, and I'm fortunate that really know most of them, really all of them. Even though I left, I knew all those guys, and helped bring most of them here. So I'm looking forward to getting out in the field and playing and seeing how they do in a real game.
All right, he's a guy that's going to be optimistic, but he's not going to super hype anyone either. But Shaq Brown saying that he's capable of taking that next step. That's good, tangible information from a great cornerbacks coach. And for one half of the two cornerbacks, for Shaq Brown, if you're a Michigan State fan, that's exactly what you want to hear about Shaq Brown, a guy that started in the past. Now, Harlan Barnett, very confident he can take the next step. Your thoughts on that? And the rest of it, he was just naming names to name names. We'll run a soundbite in a moment with him talking about Caitlyn Girvin. But your thoughts about some of what Harlan Barnett said earlier this week, and specifically that he believes he's got some confidence in Shaq Brown. What kind of player do you think Shaq Brown could be? I'm not really sure what his ceiling is, but I'm interested to find out.
I mean, he's a guy last year that put up good numbers when he was healthy. I mean, I think we forget that sometimes. He had 5 starts, missed 7 games, but he's a guy with 29 tackles. He had a sack and a half. I believe he had 2 interceptions. He's a guy that, he's a guy that can be physical. He's a guy that can go up and get the ball. He's a guy that's not afraid to play on an island. And those are all the things that like a Harlan Barnett would be looking for in a guy. But the thing that stood out to me in that soundbite that he said was Harlan Barnett doesn't use the phrase complete player or complete corner unless he really believes in the guy. That's something that in the past, I mean, that's one benefit of us having covered Harlan Barnett in the past. We know how he talks in the things he says in relation to what he's thinking about a specific player. And in the past, when he talks about guys being complete corners, I think that's a good thing. I think Shaq Brown can be a very good player. We'll talk about this later. But the other thing that Harlan Barnett kept on saying in the interview over and over again, he's asked about talent level on defense, and he said several times in the interview that he recruited those guys. It implied, like, I know what these guys can do. These guys are my guys. And the implication in that is, if I had been coaching these guys would look different than what you saw out there. That's how I read it, because, he had a couple times where he kind of straight out and said, hey, these are my guys. Don't say that the cover's bare. I know what these guys can do. And he said that in relation to Chris Jackson. He talked about Caitlyn Girvin. He talked about, Davion Williams in relation, like, when he was recruiting at Belleville, and that type of thing. So he knows what he thinks these guys can do. Harlan Barnett has always struck me as, like, supremely confident in his own ability as an evaluator. So what he sees right now, having worked with these guys, lines up with what he saw as an evaluator recruiting some of these guys. And I think that showed in the interview. That was my takeaway, at least. And maybe that's reading too much into it. But I don't think so. I think he knows that he's got some bodies to work with at corner. And I think he knows that, it's some of these guys aren't where they would have been if he was here before. But the cupboard's not bare, and he could put some good guys out there and put them in a situation to win.
Yeah, good point about Shaq Brown being injured last year. It's easy to forget that. There was certainly a parade of injuries. He's a senior this year, fourth-year senior. He'll have a chance to come back again in 2021 if he chooses to. Caitlyn Girvin last year started against Ohio State. The lights were pretty bright that day, going against big-time talent. Did not play well in that game, but it's hard to play well against Ohio State. The things he said about Caitlyn Girvin, I thought, were optimistic as well. He was asked specifically about Girvin, so that was one player that he expanded on a little bit. But he talked about Caitlyn Girvin's speed, technique, and confidence. He liked those things. And the speed, okay, that's something that he sees. I don't know if we've seen that in display, but we'll take his word for it on that. And the technique, that's good to hear. Also, something we didn't necessarily know about, in the confidence. A guy that's never lost his confidence. Those are three important attributes to be a cornerback. And Kalyn Girvin is in the thick of that cornerback battle. Here's Harlan Barnett talking about Kalyn Girvin.
I see him playing with really, really good technique. He can run. That's what we liked about him recruiting him here. He's fast because you got to be able to run out there on the edge playing corner, and he has confidence. You got to be confident to play out there. And I feel like I'm a person that tries to coach confidence in the secondary guys. So he plays with really good technique. He's smart, and he can run, and he's a willing tackler. So I think he's doing a really good job for us right now, and will continue to only get better and better and better.
In the brief moments we saw of Caitlyn Girvin last year, looked like a young player, formerly a number one ranked player in the state of Michigan, someone that they could really use to come around this year and take that role by the horns and become a starter. Of course, Julian Barnett's out there also, and Davion Williams, but Girvin is in there. They've got some talent competing for those cornerback jobs. Your thoughts on what he said about Caitlyn Girvin?
Well, I think the one thing is to go back to the Ohio State game where he played 74 snaps. That was his lone career start, but that Ohio State team had the best collection of receivers I've seen in person covering a Big Ten game. I'm talking about in terms of their five-guy rotation. I mean, when they put skill guys, and then you throw in the tailback, J.K. Dobbins, and that could do so much damage, and you got a quarterback that could extend plays. We saw the 74 snaps of Caitlyn Girvin in that game in a secondary where there was poor communication, in my opinion. So you've got a young guy that hasn't played before. He's not getting much help from his safeties, or there's not a lot of communication, and he's going against some world-class receivers. So I think that's kind of that's kind of a tough situation for him to be in. What I liked about what Harlan Barnett said is it matched up with what Scotty Hazelton was talking about earlier. Talking about a guy that can play over the top, a corner. Harlan Barnett didn't just say speed. He mentioned speed and his quickness, and he can run several times, and that kind of stood out to me because, sometimes you can say lip service like he's quick enough to be corner, but when you can say he runs, he's got speed, that's what we recruited him for, and then throw that in with a technique, that's pretty promising to me. And it's calling him a willing tackler. That's another thing. That's another badge of respect from a guy like Harlan Barnett. So I think in terms of Caitlyn Girvin, I think he saw an opportunity coming into the season, and it sounds like he's doing everything he needs to do to be part of that rotation. We've always seen with Michigan State corners, you've got to have three good ones. Harlan Barnett always likes to have three good ones, but in today's game, you want to have more than that. And we don't know how they're going to do nickel and that type of thing, but so far so good with Caitlyn Girvin, and I think that's pretty promising. But just again, hearing the way Harlan Barnett talked about him, getting more evidence from what we heard from Scotty Hazelton, those are all good signs that Caitlyn Girvin is moving in a trajectory that that he needed to move in.
Yeah, and in terms of having a nickel, last year at Kansas State, Scotty Hazelton basically started a nickel defense. He went with a 4-2-5. We talked about this on some of the other podcasts. Went with 191-pound safety in the slot linebacker position. That's in the Big 12. The games are played differently there. Against Oklahoma, of course, they did that. Against Iowa State, they did that also. In Iowa State, a little bit less of a freewheeling Big 12 style, a little bit more of a Big 10. I'm not saying they're Iowa or Wisconsin, but a little bit more like a Michigan State offensively. Iowa State was, not in terms of production and talent and everything, but the way they line up and try to attack you. They still went with 5 defensive backs. Whether they will carry that on and do it that way at Michigan State against the Big Ten schedule, they aren't going to see. They're going to want Rutgers to prepare for 5 defensive back look and a standard 4-3-4. If they go with more nickel defenses, I'm just throwing it out there and penciling it in. Shaq Brown starting at one corner, Xavier Henderson at a safety. I'm thinking Trey Person as a safety. He was a nickel guy last year. Kalyn Girvin, let's say he's the other corner. So who's the 5th defensive back? If you want another safety out there, maybe in the box area, the slot linebacker, you're looking at people like Michael Dowell, or maybe Xavier Henderson can come up. He's the one guy with size that can come up and might be best suited to be a 5th defensive back in the slot in a 4-2-5. However, you want Xavier Henderson in the back line also. You need 2 Xavier Hendersons probably. But if it's 5 defensive backs, Michael Dowell was a guy that got some playing time last year as a dime. Davion Williams, very talented guy. He needs to get traction mentally in terms of understanding, and they would like for that to come around sooner rather than later. And, of course, Julian Barnett is a talented guy that's moving back over to the defensive backfield after spending last year at wide receiver due to emergency. No shortage of talent there. Like he said, he likes it as a good group. It's intriguing because there is a lot of talent there. Harlan Barnett comes in and waves a little bit of a magic wand over these guys. Are they all going to elevate, or will 1 or 2 guys really end up looking like different players? Trey Person, Scotty Hazelton, the defensive coordinator, said last week that he just kind of mentioned in passing that Trey Person is someone they're looking at to see if he can play in the box a little bit, which is an intriguing comment because he's the smallest in that group at about 5'10", 180. So they're mixing and matching and putting together a lot of different formulations for that defensive back group, but a nice smattering of athletes there, I would say. Some untapped athletic ability. We know Julian Barnett's a good athlete. Davion Williams has done some things on special teams. Dominique Long has done a lot of good things on special teams. He has a good frame at like 6'2", 195, a guy that could fit into a nickel situation, maybe playing closer to the line of scrimmage. And Harlan Barnett said he will have a role in this group. You expect your defensive backs to be a great athletic crew, and Barnett had a hand in evaluating these guys. And I don't think it's a stretch of imagination to expect good improvement from the defensive backfield and increased improvement as the season goes along, Paul.
Yeah, and then the other guy that we haven't mentioned, that Barnett mentioned on a couple different occasions during the Zoom call, was Chris Jackson, a guy that he really liked coming out of Georgia, a guy that that he was really on really early before anyone else, having evaluated him firsthand, in some of those spring practices or winter workouts down in Georgia. And he mentioned, when someone asked him, like the question that was asked of him is, which guys are further along than you expected them to be? Chris Jackson's the one guy that he mentioned. And, I know a lot of people want to talk about Julian Barnett because he was the highest ranked guy in all that. And well, they should, because he's already done some things. He's shown a lot of athleticism, in fact, at receiver, just running routes. Wasn't always the best route runner, wasn't always the best pass catcher, but we know he can run a little bit. But a lot of the questions that have been asked about Julian Barnett, a lot of the discussion about Julian Barnett, whether it's coming with Scotty Hazelton or Harlan Barnett, is when they've been asked specifically about Julian Barnett. So I kind of read into some of the guys that they're talking about when they bring them up out of the middle of nowhere. Chris Jackson is that guy to me. I was kind of wondering, okay, I've heard that name before, but is he going to talk about him more than Davion Williams? Like, what is your sense on Julian Barnett? And then the other guy that he brought up, a really young guy he was asked about that Xavier Henderson mentioned, and the guy that I've loved for a long time that I thought was going to be, when you saw him on film coming out of Ohio, think, well, he's got a chance to be that next great 3-star, guy from Ohio, is that Angelo Gross. And we all know that Harlan Barnett throughout his career, specifically when it comes to corner, if he really likes the guy and he thinks they can help, he's not afraid to play a true freshman at corner. So, those other guys are in there fighting, but you got a youngster coming, and Harlan Barnett is looking for, for guys that have that skill set. They want to play an island. They're not afraid. They want the ball to come to their side of the field. They can high point the ball. We saw Josiah Scott play very early. We've seen guys all over the place throughout the D'Antonio era playing as true freshmen at corners. We've even seen it at safety. That's a little bit dicier, but at corner it's a lot easier to get done, especially if you feel like you've got good leadership and communication in the back row, which I think they feel like with Xavier Henderson. But Angelo Gross is another guy that's possibly on the rise, and that's exciting because you're going to need talk about all kinds of different scenarios, whether it's injuries or illness. You're going to need a lot of guys over a season, and we're seeing this with the NFL right now, where guys are falling to injuries that you just don't expect guys to. It's because they didn't have a ton of time to ramp up into that season and get their bodies in football shape. That's why I've mentioned in several podcasts or VCasts that we've done, it takes a period of time to get ready to play football, and that's something people don't always think about. So there are probably going to be, in some instances, more injuries this year. We've seen it throughout the NFL with receivers, running backs, even offensive linemen, just like soft tissue type of injuries.
Yeah, and possibly the slow ramp up to the season might prevent a little bit of that in the Big Ten. You have to hope that's the case, but you're exactly right that there's a lot of different variables to consider this year. And you're right about defensive backs. That's one area in which true freshmen have had a way to get their foot in the door into the playing group. Specifically, when you get into nickel and dime situations, it's a good way to get someone's feet wet without giving them, saddling them with, 60 snaps in a game. Maybe you can give them 10 in a certain little situation. Whether or not that continues under Hazelton, we'll have to wait and see. But you're right. Angelo Gross, no surprise to us at SpartanMag.com that he's come in and impressed. I'm assuming he'll get on the field in some capacity because there's no worry. You don't have to worry about preserving anyone's red shirt this year. Can he push these guys? Can he gain traction sooner than Davion Williams in year 3 or Julian Barnett in year 2, year 1 in the defensive backfield? It's all about great competition. He's got some good bodies to work with. This is what Harlan Barnett had to say about Angelo Gross, the true freshman out of Ohio.
I was trying to keep that a secret, but since you're going to say that, he is a football player. He's a really good football player. I like him a lot, and he's gonna do a lot of great things here at Michigan State. A really, really good football player.
The voice inflection there and the way Harlan Barnett's face lit up when he says, he's a really good football player. When you read that, a really good football player, that's kind of said a lot. That was one of things Mark D'Antonio said about everybody. But when you get the voice inflection and the way his face lit up about it, I mean, he was emphatic about it. And then he took his foot off the gas pedal, didn't want to hype up a freshman too much. If you know Harlan Barnett, he wants to let a freshman be a freshman. He doesn't want to throw headlines out there too much about him. But certainly, Angelo Gross in a short period of time has impressed. That's a good sign for Angelo Gross, a good sign for that defensive backfield moving forward. Offensive line, Mel Tucker revealed that Jordan Reed is still opting out. We weren't sure about that. Jordan Reed was listed on the roster. It's my understanding he came back and worked out with the team during the 5-week January workout period, 5.5 weeks in the month of August and part of September, but is continuing his plans to opt out for the season. A little bit of a surprise to me because, Michigan State usually, if they put someone's name on the roster, it means they're on the practice field. And, when the season began in other years, they would hand out a roster and we would quickly look at it to see if anyone was missing. And a lot of times there might be players that were delayed in terms of getting cleared by the NCAA clearinghouse. So they're not on the roster. He's not practicing today. And, a week later he'd be cleared and he'd be on the roster and on the field. Usually you didn't get on that roster they handed out unless you were on the field. Maybe that's changed with Mel Tucker. I'm not sure. But in years past, if you were on that roster, you were playing. So I assumed Reed was out there. I assumed that's what that meant. But Justin Stevens was also on that roster. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Justin Stevens had a pre-existing condition. He tweeted out late in the summer that he was opting out because of some medical concerns. And also he's Canadian. I mean, where would you want to be in a COVID situation with a medical pre-existing situations? You'd want to be in Canada. It made perfect sense for Justin Stevens to go home, stay home. But he was on that roster too. And I was like, man, that's a big turnaround for Stevens. And I really didn't think Stevens was going to be back. So that made me question the credibility of Reed being on that roster. Turns out Reed was on the roster, but not on the field. We're just trying to figure these things out with, a flashlight and a Rand McNally Road Atlas and a magnifying glass. So long story short, Reed is not out there. And that makes Michigan State offensive tackle position situation, which is already somewhat precarious and thin. But now you don't have Reed, and that's a guy that a lot of people, we've talked about it before, wasn't a great player, but he was a steady player. He was a rugged player. He was functional. He was accountable. He was reliable. He was there for 26 straight starts. Now you take that out, and now that offensive line position, which I thought had great potential to be a surprise group, still could be, but the margin for error gets a little more precarious without Jordan Reed out there. Paul, your thoughts on that? I thought that was big news this week that Reed is still opting out.
Yeah, I think it's big news, but I think one of the reasons why they put him on the roster, this is my and Stevens on the roster, is because it shows support for your players. If you're saying that, hey, we support you, and then you pull them off the roster, that's like, I know that we don't think about that, but if I'm a player and I look at a spring roster and see my teammates on there and I don't see myself out there, that would be the same thing if I was injured. In my opinion, if I was, injured and I wasn't on the roster, I'd feel pretty crappy. So I think that's why that's the case. I think that Michigan State's a better spot than they might be in other years with a guy like Kevin Jarvis, because he's done a lot of, I thought he did some good, he's done some good things at tackle. He's a physical player. And I'm a little bit more bullish on this, I think, because of him. I think, I'll go back and compare it to, I forget what year it was. Maybe it was 2010 when Skylar Berkland decided not to play football, and Michigan State got a big contribution from a junior college transfer in Bo Finotti, who really was that was the biggest recruit in the previous recruiting cycle just because of what he did. I think with Kevin Jarvis, so he's a big physical dude that that's played a lot of football, and when he's been healthy, he's been pretty darn good. I think he can get the job done. But yeah, certainly from a depth standpoint, not having a guy like Reed out there, a guy that's not great but durable, and that's one thing that this offensive line hasn't had. On the other hand, if you're not going to play with Reed, I'd rather have you working with your guys going through out training camp and working with the guys that you've got and giving those guys reps. So it's a little bit different than a situation where if Reed had been practicing, had been repping, during training camp, then all of a sudden he's injured at the end of training camp and you got to find someone else to pop in there. I think Michigan State's going to do okay if Jarvis plays as well as I think he will. And I think he's a guy that I wouldn't want to see necessarily at left tackle because, I think he's more suited towards, he's kind of one of those tweener kind of guys, like that probably ideal for a guard, but could play right tackle if he needed to. It's good to have a guy like Jarvis, but it's going to make depth at tackle a little bit more interesting, where they're going to have to get, some growth from, maybe even a dude like a Spencer Brown, who I was a little bit surprised when Jay Johnson mentioned him, and I'm still kind of like waiting to see. I'm taking a wait and see thing with that, but as well as I do, and probably better than I do, that sometimes when you get a new O-line coach, there's guys that are possibly going to step up that you just didn't envision stepping up. It's something that happens quite a bit. We saw it in 2007 with some of the guys that stepped up, guys that really hadn't done a whole lot during their career. Maybe Spencer Brown's that guy. I wasn't sure about him coming out of high school. He looked different, but you don't know what these guys can do with a good quality offensive line coach, experience and belief in themselves, not to mention weight room work. And I'll go back to the fact that so many of these guys have played already. It's not, I think you're going to be okay plugging in guards. I don't have any worry about that, if finding a spot for Jarvis, I think. But if Jarvis can stay healthy, depth is my biggest concern now. It's not necessarily quality of play, but it's depth behind like a Jarvis or an Arcuri.
Absolutely. I mean, A.J. Arcuri and Kevin Jarvis are guys that have missed time for injuries their whole career. And now I'm assuming they're going to be the first string offensive tackles. And, A.J. Arcuri was pretty good in pass protection last year. Judging by what I hear on the message board and from fans, I think fans had more misgivings about Reed than Arcuri for some reason. I thought Reed was a little more consistent. Arcuri only played half the season. Arcuri was good in pass protection, needs to become more of a better run blocker. Reed was probably their best run blocker, but you don't get a lot of credit for that. You're not noticed as much as when you give up a sack. Here's my point. A.J. Arcuri was pretty good. He's functional as a first-year starter. Okay, but fans might not have valued A.J. Arcuri all that much until you take him out of the lineup at Rutgers. And you've got Devontae Dobbs out there left tackle, and it was not good. And then Dobbs was struggling, so they put Mustafa Khalifa out there left tackle, and it was not good. And they're fortunate they were playing against the worst team in the Big Ten. A.J. Arcuri was available. They didn't want to play him. He went in and played 24 snaps. Michigan State was winning 10-0 at halftime. That game was a little bit dangerous. Michigan State went ahead and won 27-0 against a terrible offense. They didn't need to score more than 3 points to win that game. But you don't think A.J. Arcuri is a big deal until you take him out. You don't think Jordan Reed's a big deal until you take him out and he's not available. Then all of a sudden you've got a hole in the dam and you're like, how did that happen? Well, you're losing Jordan Reed. And I don't discount that loss there unless Jarvis and Arcuri can come out and play 12 games each and be even better than they have before. If that happens, then you don't have a problem. But if you get a little bit of that injury situation again, things could get real thin in a hurry. Spencer Brown, you're right, that is big news. That is a big development. Spencer Brown, good frame, good straight line speed, good athlete. We saw that from the beginning, but the lateral movement as a high school player was not good as a junior, not good in the T-shirt camps. A little bit better at the outset of his senior year, and was kind of okay his senior year with that. But there was maybe a slope of improvement late in his high school career in that regard. I thought that maybe he was a guy that might move to defensive end because he has a frame and has or defensive line because he has attributes, but maybe not that lateral movement you need at tackle. Saw him in the green-white game. It's the only time we've seen him in green Michigan State jersey on the field, and that's 18 months ago. And he was an early enrollee. He's a guy that still was supposed to be in high school, came to Michigan State early, to his credit, went through spring practice, which I'm sure served him well at this point, got into the green-white game, and looked like a high school player. I don't mean to criticize him at all. Good attitude, enrolled early, was out there, was learning, looked like a guy not ready to play. Fall came. Other true freshmen played. J.D. Duplain played. Nick Samac played, started, both of those guys. Devontae Dobbs started. Didn't turn out real well, but 3 true freshmen started, got on the field. Some walk-ons got on the field. Spencer Brown never got on the field, and that didn't surprise me. So I was like, well, he's an athlete, but I'm not surprised that he's not making a lot of progress toward the playing group. Then we don't see the team for 10 months. COVID hits, quarantine and everything. New coaching staff comes in, and boom, Jay Johnson, the new offensive coordinator, mentions Spencer Brown as being a pleasant surprise. Yeah, to me, that is a pleasant surprise. To a lot of astute fans that are aware of a 4-star recruit coming in, they may not be surprised. Well, yeah, he's a 4-star recruit. He's a redshirt freshman. He should be ready to start. No, this is not something you just assume, this progression, because he's always had a good attitude. He showed up. He's wanted to work, but this has not been a steady ascent that everybody on the inside saw coming from Brown. But the attitude is good. The frame is good. And that is a big plus to help probably he's a second string offensive tackle right now. His ascension, his availability to be just in the conversation is where he should be, and apparently that's where he is now. Might seem like a minor development to me, given the precarious nature of the offensive tackle situation, especially with the Reed being out. Spencer Brown is a nice layer added to a precarious situation, Paul.
Yeah, and then we've seen this over the years. Like if you talk about
I'm not saying he's ready to play right now. I'm just saying he's another body that gives them a chance, other than Khalifa and Dobbs, gives them someone in there.
Yeah, you just want to know sometimes that a guy is on schedule, right? And we've seen this over the years. Like you think of if you want to look at the D'Antonio era, the number of 4-star guys where they didn't pan out, and you can go through. I'm not going to list all the guys out there, but a lot of those guys are on the offensive line. I think back to that 2009 recruiting class that Michigan State had that was considered by some the number one O-line class in the Big Ten, or was ranked as such, and that thing was a pretty much of a flop, except for Micajah Reynolds, David Barrett, he didn't play much, but then you got a bunch of other guys in there. Nate Klatt, he didn't work out. There's some injuries as well. I think was Zach Huter in that class, or he was in the one before that. But that was so some of these guys that have the ranking, it's ranking with offensive linemen. It's about kind of body type and projection. And once they get on campus, it's like a big man. They're all in basketball. They're all projects to some extent. It's about getting incrementally better, and to know that Spencer Brown is on target now, or the fact that he's making noise, and the fact that no one asks about him and Jay Johnson brought him up he could have brought a lot of other guys up. He could have brought up JD Duplain. He could have brought up Nick Samac, and I've heard that those guys are making progress. I think Nick Samac and JD Duplain, I think both those guys are quality guys for the future. They've already shown what they can do as true freshmen. They're only going to be better from here on out. But for him to say Spencer Brown, that says a lot to me. And it's nice to see. We're hearing some things about development on the O-line, prior to the start of the season, and not just guys getting thrust into games that have no business being in games, and then kind of seeing where they're at from there. It's nice to hear positive development stories from young offensive linemen, because that's something that's something that hasn't happened very much in recent years.
Right, and that's an offensive coordinator talking about offensive linemen and not feeling the need to list everybody to give one person a compliment. So that strengthens the point about Spencer Brown, headed in the right direction. Not saying he's ready for prime time, but it's good to have that body in there. In terms of walk-ons, keep an eye on Jack Henrich. It's a guy that, 6'7", was on the travel squad a couple of times last year. In emergency, maybe he's a guy that can come in. Nick Samac, who started last year at center a little bit when Matt Allen was injured. Nick Samac repped at offensive tackle last year before just focusing on center due to emergency. And it's my understanding he's been repping a little bit of left tackle, if not a lot of it, during preseason camp now. Talented guy, true sophomore. Samac is another body that is probably capable that you can maybe put out there in an emergency, but you don't want any emergencies at that position, that's for sure. As far as running back goes, Conor Hayward was someone who spoke with media yesterday. Running backs coach Will Peagler spoke. Will Peagler, people got an idea of his infectious personality, energy, and exuberance. Those were the things that Mel Tucker liked about him when he was a GA at Georgia. Those were the things that Jay Johnson liked about him when he was an offensive analyst at the University of Minnesota when Jay Johnson was there. Young coach who's always wanted to be a coach, even when he was in college, and has ramped in that direction throughout his career. A guy that's helped behind the scenes in recruiting as a GA at Georgia and quality control guy at Colorado. Now he's finally a full-time assistant coach, and this is his life, and you can see that when he speaks. And people that haven't seen the video that Paul put up of Will Peagler, go check it out. He's an interesting guy, and people are impressed. Older coaches are impressed with his football knowledge, but also that energy that he's bringing. But he mentioned Conor Hayward. Conor Hayward, an interesting story, of course, entered the transfer portal after 4 games last year. He revealed yesterday that Conor Hayward, after he entered the portal, put on a lot of bad weight, stayed up too late, didn't eat right, and his family saw him on vacation, and they're like, what's going on? What are you doing? What's wrong with you? It was kind of a wake-up call for him, got back in shape. He says he visited other places. Paul, I don't know what kind of bites he got in the portal, Mel Tucker was hired. He knew Mel Tucker from the recruiting days when Mel Tucker was at Georgia. Mel Tucker recruited 2 players from his high school, so he knew Conor a little bit. Conor knew him. And Conor all of a sudden decided he wanted to stay. Mel Tucker allowed him to stay, which was a big move because when you're a new coach, you want all the scholarship slots you can get. Brought him back. Will Piegler said that Conor Hayward has been a good leader. The players look up to him. They're impressed with his ball skills. He's back down to about 227. Just judging, I've not seen him face to face, but looking at the Zoom interview, he does look like he's lost a little bit of that baby fat. So he's reshaped his body. Piegler mentioned that. So, he's got that versatility as a former wide receiver in high school. Everybody knows that Conor Hayward has good hands. Next, he needs to show that if he gets a handoff, he can read the blocking and take it where it's blocked and have the vision and instincts to be a running back. That was one of the things he lacked as someone who was trying to become a running back late in his career. Anyway, with Piegler speaking yesterday, of course, Hayward's a story. He's an interesting story because he's back on the team. But I was a little surprised that Hayward got that many compliments. I was kind of thinking, okay, last year, Elijah Collins overtook him, became the number 1 running back. Anthony Williams kind of overtook him also. Anthony Williams played better in the bowl game. He's coming along. I'm thinking Conor Hayward coming back as number 3 tailback at best. But judging by the comments yesterday, he's right in there. And I was a little bit surprised about that, Paul. Am I misreading that whole situation?
I don't know what to think. In terms of, like you hear the iron sharpens iron thing. Is this a deal like Jarris Jones pushing Isaiah Lewis back in the day? That was a really good competition. Both those guys ended up getting serious roles. Obviously, Jarris, Isaiah Lewis, one of the best safeties of the D'Antonio era. Jarris Jones had a couple good years where he made some plays and whatnot. I'm not sure what to think, but I think that they're using him as a stick and a carrot for Elijah Collins to get to do that much more. And Elijah Collins wants that. He wants that competition. So to me, my feel on that, and until I see Conor Hayward do it in a game. To me, he's a complimentary back that they're going to use in certain packages. Maybe they get him out there in a two tailback type set. We've heard, we heard even Elijah Collins talk about he feels like there's going to be better. He didn't say specifically better spacing, but the indication was he feels like there's going to be in this offense things available to Michigan State receivers or tailbacks or whatever that have been available to other teams. Just scheme wise, I think there's some things that you can do with Conor Hayward. Lots of it is, I talked about earlier about knowing how to read the subtext of what Harlan Barnett is saying. I can speak Harlan Barnett, or at least I can interpret the Harlan Barnett stuff. Piegler is like really, he is really positive, and he's really complimentary. I mean, every one of those scholarship tailbacks he named off for the guy that he indicated that he felt could be a feature back, and so I don't know if he really believes that. I don't know, if he thinks, well, in case they got in there. He mentioned also that they could have a tailback rotation up to 4 tailbacks. I don't know how that works. That seems like not pass the smell test. To me right now, I think they want Elijah Collins going as hard as he can, working on the things that they want him to work on. And he mentioned as such in that interview, he wants him to run with a lower pad level. He wants him to finish runs, all those guys. And those same things can apply to Conor Hayward as well. I think that Conor Hayward's motivated, and I think he thinks he's in the thick of things, and perhaps he is. But to me, Elijah Collins, he's a guy that came up 12 yards shy of 1,000 yards behind an offensive line that was one of the most inconsistent that I've seen for various reasons. That guy's your proven guy. Of course, you're going to need other guys. You need two tailbacks. My biggest question with Conor Hayward is if you don't win the competition, and I'm going to come out and say this right now, that he's not going to win the competition. How do you feel about being number 2? And are you really number 2? Because
or 3?
Yeah, and are you really number 2? Because Anthony Williams is another guy that got a lot of run in that interview. One of the things that I was listening to in that interview with Will Piegler was how he's talking about Anthony Williams in relation to Jordan Simmons, because Jordan Simmons is a true freshman coming in. They really see as a home run threat. But in Anthony Williams, they see as a guy that they're really talking about in a lot of ways that I remember people talking about, Jeremy Lankford, in that he's got the home run threat, but once he learns how to hit it between the tackles, run downhill, pick up those yardage, those 3, 4, 5 yard runs that turn into 50-yard runs, then he's going to be special. I think that, to me, Conor Hayward's not in a much different situation than he was after the Western Michigan game last year when Elijah Collins hammered down that starting job. To me, it's how does he accept it, and is he willing to accept being in a package type of guy that's used in certain situations. And I wonder if he's not going to be better in that, if they can get him the ball in space. Conor Hayward's done some good things when he hasn't had to carry a bunch of times. Like, I think of some of the speed option things he did, earlier in his career, where he looked fast before he started getting some hits and kind of, slowing down a little bit. But, it's good to have that guy in there, but he has to be willing, like Nick Hill was willing back in the day, to accept his role. And to me, you'd have to accept your role by even, coming back to the school where you were leapfrogged by guys that are already on the roster. But if he doesn't, that's going to present an interesting dynamic. I expect that he will accept his role, but what that role is going to be, I don't know. I do think it's probably going to be more of a can he receive a little bit. But then again, you look at guys like Elijah Collins. I thought he got better as the season wore on, catching the football out of the backfield. Anthony Williams, I thought, would have caught the ball better out of the backfield last year than he did. But again, he entered the season with an injury and had to overcome that a little bit. So I don't know where Conor Hayward is. It's good to hear that he's gotten better, that he's pushing Elijah Collins. But until I see that on the field, it's one of those feel-good, it's one of those training camp stories that I think is a good thing. I think he's further along than maybe some of the other guys that have been hyped up in the past that didn't really kind of bear out. But Elijah Collins, to me, is the guy until he proves that he's not.
Sure, and as of right now, Michigan State has a lot of scholarships invested in the running back position. They went out and offered Donovan Eaglin last year, thinking Conor Hayward was not on the program. And now they got, 6 guys on scholarship at running back or whatever, and they've got 2 more coming in. I don't know how those numbers are all going to shake out in the near future. Anyway, Paul, any other closing comments before we close this one down?
I wonder what you make of Piegler's comments about Brandon Wright. We talked about him, last VCast about, man, I don't know what 240 looks like. We've seen guys eat themselves out of the running back position. Piegler was like, this is the kind of smell test thing for me. I will be watching to see what Brandon Wright does to see how I should evaluate the comments coming out of Piegler's mouth. I'm not saying it's negative, and I'm not saying that he doesn't think that each of those guys could play the role of feature back. But when he talks about Brandon Wright being fast enough to get the edge, that's a big statement when you guys are 240 pounds. He's not Le'Veon Bell, to my understanding. So that kind of gives me pause when he's talking about different guys doing different things, because until I see 240 pounds turn the corner against the Big Ten defense, I'm gonna, unless there's a complete breakdown on defense, I'm gonna be like really skeptical about some of those comments.
Sure, and we're trying to learn some of those comments. There have been coaches in the past that would say great things about all the players, and you got to the point where you couldn't believe any of it because it was all nothing against the coach saying that. He's doing the right thing diplomatically for his players, and he wants to give them some good positive publicity. But for us trying to figure things out without being able to watch practice, you're right. Brandon Wright, we saw him on the field a little bit last year and, didn't look bad, but a guy that had the speed to get the edge didn't come to mind. Now he adds 20 pounds. Is he going to be able to do that? I loved his film. I've said as a junior, I thought his senior film was not as good as his junior film. And sometimes we've seen running backs, those big-boned running backs are big-boned athletes. Sometimes they are at their fastest when they're 17. Lawrence Thomas, Gerald Owens. Gerald Owens had great running back film as a junior in New Jersey, but he just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger and grew out of the position, ended up being a serviceable defensive tackle as a fifth-year senior. The 240 pounds with Brandon Wright, I'm wondering if that's just kind of natural growth, that he just put on weight naturally, not out of shape, nothing else. And can he maintain that quickness and that speed that he showed as a high school junior? Excellent question. Back when he was a high school junior, there were not a lot of schools looking at him, but some of the schools that were looking at him were thinking of him in terms of defensive line a little bit. He played behind like a Division II tailback that was ahead of him when he was a junior, didn't get a lot of playing time that year, but still had really good film in the short amount of times. Or maybe that was when he was a sophomore. Anyway, he kind of said not just a big back, short yardage guy, a guy that could come in all situations, a 3-down back. So we'll have to wait and see what that all means. But it's a crowded room, and you bring in Jordan Simmons, who has a lot of talent. And good news is they've got a 900-yard rusher coming back who is strong and getting stronger and wants to get faster as a breakaway home run threat. So it's a good situation at running back. The competition there is going to create a good number 2 and a good number 3, I would think. But Paul, I appreciate your insights, appreciate your opinions, and being able to talk Michigan State sports, Michigan State football, and basketball with you. Look forward to doing it again next week. Appreciate everybody watching. Remember JFQ Lending, our friends, our title sponsor here for the SpartanMag.com VCast. Everybody, hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll check out some more interviews next week as we get inside of 2 weeks for Michigan State to kick off the 2020 season finally against Rutgers at Spartan Stadium on October 24th. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the JFQ Lending VCast on SpartanMag.com.